Welcome to Flat Like Me, your host, the enigmatic, illmatic Vince White here. I wonder what my legacy is going to be. I'm so into so many things, but this is something I found interesting about flat Earth is the uh, the dome itself, the um, the rakia, the firmament. Um, the concept of that. Uh, well, in researching some things, I found out there's something called a superfluid, and some scientists have postulated that time space, the time space concept would probably be much like a superfluid. It acts much like a superfluid, which made me start to think, well, what if space is a fluid, which is a concept of a lot of flat earthers that they believe that space may in fact be some type of fluid, um, and not the empty void that we're told. Now, why is that? Why are we saying something crazy like that? Well, it's uh, I don't know. I'm not good with names, but there's been several experiments in the past where they were trying to account for the movement of the stars, and this concept called the ether was developed, which accounted for the uni- the unifying movement of all the stars moving in unison, basically. That it seemed as though the stars were in some type of gel that when it moved, all the stars moved. Now, of course, there were some wandering stars, which we call planets, that they seem to have their own flow or tunnel or movement through this gel or this cosmic soup. But for the most part, all the stars keep their alignment. There's no parallax. They know they don't overlap one another. They keep their formation, and they had to have kept their formation for over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, because we can go back through the chronological record, and we can see that the stars have their same formations. Okay, so that being said, these people who gave credit to the ether, their concept was discounted by Einstein. This is really what Einstein did. He got rid of the ether and created something called relativity. Now, ether is something that we can see and touch in our physical world. It's not theoretical. The concept of hydromechanics explaining why if I dump a bunch of golf balls into a pool and I spin the water around, that the golf balls are pretty much, once they start getting to a certain speed, are pretty much going to stay within uh, basically their same trajectory, motion, and everything else. That may not be completely true. I guess the concept is that if you're in a substance and that substance moves, then it affects all things in that substance. Okay, we can visualize that, we can see that, we can experiment on that right here on Earth. We know that that's a real thing. Now, relativity, we don't know is real. It's what they call theoretical science, theoretical, or the terminology is they use, but like theoretical quantum physics. Okay, so basically, whenever they tell you something is theoretical, it's a theory. It has no roots per se in observable science, which is what science is. Science is something that you can observe, that you can then repeat, test, get the same result, and test it over and over again, and that is what science is. Science is not You coming up with an idea that cannot be tested, and no one else has seen it, and it doesn't exist in the natural world that we know. Okay, so this concept of relativity is still a concept, but ether is a real thing that can explain the movement of the stars. All right, which later you kind of see them kind of come up with this thing called dark matter, which is, if it's not the ether, it is akin to it. Okay, it's a close cousin. I say all that to get to this concept of fluid, fluid in space, and the dome. So I was sitting there going for a walk one day, and we were looking at the fog coming up off the ground. I guess it was a fresh rain or it was hot, something, I forget what it was. And there's a fountain the on the grounds here, and it shoots up this geyser of water, and then it comes down. And sometimes, most of the time, all the time, really, as the water reaches the pinnacle of the geyser's spray at the top, it becomes a mist. And in the right sunlight, you can see the mist rise up into the air. Basically, you're seeing the water cycle. You're seeing this mist basically turn into, it's evaporating because, I guess, the pressure, and it starts to rise up. Now, we all know this. We were taught this in high school and so forth. I'm taking a sip of my coffee. And we're told that the water evaporates from the ground, and then as it rises, it condenses. Basically, it forms clouds and things like that. As it gets thicker and thicker and thicker, those clouds become more and more laden with moisture until that moisture falls, which we call precipitation. And that precipitation falls in the form of rain, hail, snow, right? And it falls down onto the ground, and it falls on the mountaintops, and it runs from the mountaintops, forming rivers and channels, and those channels run down to the ground and into the crevice of the ground and form surface water and underground lakes and rivers until it eventually runs out to the oceans again, and the process basically starts all over again. So there's a cycle to it. So I began thinking, okay, well, we know there's some experiments with helium balloons and helium rising, and the reason why helium rises is because it's lighter than air. So it's actually lighter than the air around us. It's lighter than H2O. So I started thinking about that. Well, if you have a substance that's lighter than our atmosphere, but yet it can exist in our atmosphere, like, on the ground we have helium, then I wonder what cycle it has. All right, so I began thinking, what if helium rises? All right, and it has to rise above our atmospheric level, so it is considered. My dog is okay. I don't know what my dog is looking at. Anyway, so if it's above our atmospheric level, then helium can rise into space. Basically, helium can rise into space. And so I started thinking, all right, so helium is a space element, one that can rise into space. And I was wondering, well, I wonder if it follows the same type of cycle, that at some point it rises, and does it collect itself like the moisture condenses, forms condensation. So is there a helium cloud-like level? All right, this is what I'm thinking, okay? And is at the level that this cloud like helium level forms, is it so cold that it freezes? And is this frozen element layer like a dome? So my point is that if helium is rising so high and its condensation level is above that of our atmosphere somewhere in space, is it then forming, collecting itself into a level where it can't go any higher? Okay. And this level is obviously in a cold region because it's in what we call space. Is this level a frozen level? And is this what the dome is? A frozen form of helium? All right, maybe that's not the case. But let's take it one step further. If helium is rising above the atmosphere into what we would consider space, basically it's lighter than air, so it's rising to a level where there's no oxygen, because it can sit above oxygen. Well, I also learned that helium is a superfluid, that once you freeze it, it does not freeze, I believe, but it becomes this viscous element that has no viscosity. It has no resistance. So if you were to move in a superfluid helium state, you would not be able to feel the water or the liquid helium around you because it offers no resistance. It's a superfluid. It's a superconductor. And that superhelium or superfluid helium, once put into a state of motion, basically will retain that motion for a very, 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 very insane amount of time, if not forever. So, are the heavens above us a superfluid helium set in motion in a perpetual spin, creating some type of electrical current that then reveals itself, as the electrical charges within our atmosphere, the electromagnetic pull, lights in the sky, the stars themselves, the energy that the Earth can create, are what we looking at is what I can't even say this, is the space we're looking at super fluid helium, and that the lights and stars inside it are a form of hydroluminescence, which is electrical current or actual sound vibrating in a liquid substance. And if it's superfluid, helium superfluid that has no resistance, once you focus the sound in a superfluid, will it ever go away? Oh, well, can it last a very long time? So if I'm able to play a sound large enough that it turns into light, it becomes illuminescent. Because it's a superfluid, it then vibrates continually and then back in on itself. So it creates a star that is everlasting. You understand? And then if that fluid is moving, then it's moving these stars or these focal points of sound around in a soup that is floating above the oxygen level of our atmosphere. Hey, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's 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 very interesting, and I think this whole flat Earth cosmology is interesting in itself because it just it makes you it forces you to think that are you being told everything? Whether the arguments make sense or not, I'm going to start to take this position instead of one that's more defined and firm. I just want to take a position of, hey, whether it's real or not, it's interesting. And the fact that you can make sense of some of these things, these arguments that flat earthers have, and then you juxtapose that to the fact that you know you're not told everything by the powers that be, then you add in the fact that there we have schools for leaders, and leaders are taught how to lead, and there's certain tactics in leading a large populace. And unfortunately, what some of those tactics have become is that in order to lead a large populace, some have resorted to the practice of lying and manipulating that population into a docile state so that that population is something that will not turn back and bite the hand that quote unquote feeds them or their leadership. So leaders are constantly aware that the sword of Damocles is hanging over their head and that the citizens that they lead may in fact turn on them and kill them, because I mean every revolution there's bloodshed. And so leaders, I'm pretty sure, are taught to, hey, we have to control the population, we have to make for sure that they're not thinking or of revolt, that they're not capable of organizing into a revolt. And if we can dumb them down as much as possible, it helps. All right, so if that is a form of leadership that's taught, and you have man learning how to lead mankind for over hundreds of thousands of years, and this secret knowledge of how to manipulate a population is being taught for hundreds and thousands of years, then you don't know what has been pulled from history, what facts have been withheld, and how deep the lie runs, and what you are sold as a reality may in fact be a complete facsimile of the truth. That we may not even know the beginnings of what's true and what's not, because that information could be detrimental to someone in control. Like I said before, just a great argument for flat Earth, just from a military standpoint, is if you know the lay of the terrain and you have your opponents thinking the lay of the terrain is something completely different, that's a huge advantage. If you're trying to fire some type of artillery hundreds of thousands of miles away, and you think the landscape is one shape, and you come to find out, but it's not, then you're going to have a hard time developing artillery that can travel that far, because you're trying to make it go around something where there's no need for it to go around. So, well, you have to take in the shape of the curvature of the Earth, and when you do that, your missiles seem to just go up and come back down and hit the ground, and you don't understand why, because you're having them curve where the terrain is flat. And you say, well, we don't have any problems with airplanes. When airplanes go up and fly, I mean, they fly pretty well. Why are we having so much problems with our missiles? I don't understand that. But if you take that into consideration, that that could explain a lot. But my point is that the truth has been manipulated. Um, if if you can go within your family tree and people can hide the fact that your sister is actually your mother, which happens, okay, and hide it from you your entire life, that's just within your family. If you gave mankind 100,000 years to hide the truth and to set up a society that reflects the fake truth they've created, we could do it very easily. You've given them a lot of time to make it happen. You've given them a lot of time to create maps, to work out false math, to come up with false stories, uh, to deconstruct religion, to conquer every native culture, to colonize everything that's around, to put in a new system of belief, to cancel out all the old gods, to create new ones, to you've given them 100,000 years to do that. And you look through the history books and you see these steps happening, but never do you think, why? You know, I happen to be African American, and a young lady I date, she's white. We get in a couple of conversations every once in a while, and we'll talk about how, like the Egyptians, what nationality the Egyptians were, or when they replace someone's ethnicity with someone who's white. Like, yeah, like all the Egyptian movies, they have white people dressed up as Egyptians, and that seemed normal to her. And she even questioned, why does that seem odd to you? And I was trying to convey that they have sold you something that is not true, and they sold it so well that you can't perceive anything else. But I'm gonna give a really good example of how odd that is to the rest of the world, who really knows the truth. Okay, if we were given an award, if we were writing a movie about Clint Eastwood and I don't know, um, someone else, Clint Eastwood and some other action hero from back in the day, let's say Robert Redford, right. And we put in, to do this story about Clint Eastwood, we put in Jet Li as Clint Eastwood and Jackie Chan as Robert Redford, and they did the biopic of these characters. You would say that is ridiculous. Those guys are Asian. How are they going to play Robert Redford and Clint Eastwood? Yeah, that's exactly how odd it is when you have, let's say, um, white actors playing Egyptians. But if you don't question it, that means you've bought into it. And if they're able to manipulate history that well now to the point that you believe white actors can play Egyptians, it's just like saying Jackie Chan and Jet Li could play um, Clint Eastwood and whoever the guy is that says Robert Redford. That's a brainwashing that is so powerful The manipulation of the truth that is so powerful that if you gave someone 100,000 years, if that's what they can do within 50 years, switch out whites for Egyptians. Imagine what the truth they have hidden if you've given them 100,000 years. The shape of the earth, where the stars are, what the sun is, what the moon is. Because we know governments lie. We know they lie. So you have to look at the evidence. And so, the whole moon thing, when I bring up the moon thing, like, okay, they said they went to the moon, but they haven't gone back. No one stops to think about this. Oh no, it's because it was too expensive. It's just, but NASA spends billions of dollars a day. Shouldn't you be upset that they're spending billions of dollars a day, supposedly just floating around in our upper atmosphere, in a space station that could crash any moment? Why not build that on a planet? That space station on a planet, a moon station, where it's on physical land that won't crash. And conduct your experiments there. Your main experiment that you would be conducting is, can we live in space long term? That's what we really want to know, right? We don't want to know if we can stay 250 miles up above the sky. And you're doing that for 50 years, and your reason why you can't go back is you lost the blueprints? And no one questions that? This is like you got a best friend and say he has a girlfriend. He's been saying it for 50 years. You know this guy for 50 years. You say he's a girlfriend. You've never seen her. He's got no pictures of her. You've never seen her. She doesn't show. And when you ask, hey, let's go see her now. No, well, I lost the directions to her house. And you never question it. And when they have us so well brainwashed that when you question that theory, like, dude, what the heck? You lost her directions to her house and you haven't been there in 50 years? When you question it, they call you crazy. But anyway, get back to my point. We'll wrap this up. If helium does rise above our atmosphere, and when it's cooled, it forms a superfluid, is there fluid in space? I think about this a lot when I walk our dog, we look at the sky, and I say, we're walking in water. My girlfriend's always like, what do you mean? That we're the atmosphere is water. It's just that it's so thin. To us, we don't realize it. I don't know if fish realize they're in water. They might think they're in a void too. That they're flying just like birds are flying. I don't know. I said, but yeah, we're walking in water, and the air is full of water, but we don't realize it. Now we've had a couple of major storms and floods where water is literally pouring from the sky. It's not that it's never there. It's always there. Sometimes it's more than less. But the concept is still true. There's water in the sky. What I'm asking you is, what's beyond that water? Is there a superfluid? And is that space? Who knows? But that seems to be another quick episode of Flat Like Me. My comic book Flat will be coming out in November, and we hope to get a lot of these orders filled. Thank you guys for your patience, and until then, hey, question everything, and let your truth be something that you discover. So you decide. Thanks again, everybody.